Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today we're going back to 1983 and I'm going to talk about the Witches series by James Darke. This is a series of 8 books which I believe all came out in 1983. They were published by Sphere in the UK and as far as I know that is the only edition that's available. They're out of print and pretty hard to come by, but a while ago I managed to track down books 1, 2 and 3 for a decent price and I recently read them and really enjoyed them. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't the covers that initially drew me to these books, and I thought I would do my best at recreating the look for today's video. The author, James Darke, is actually a pseudonym for a very prolific British author called Lawrence James. He had work published under numerous pen names until he sadly passed away in 2000. The Witches are set in England in 1645 during the time of the Witchfinders. So let's start off with book 1, and this one is called The Prisoner. Normally with my book reviews I try to keep them spoiler free, but I think in this case with these books that I'm going to be reviewing today I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, so it will get a bit spoilery. So if you'd really rather know nothing about these books then feel free to click away now, but I hope you'll stick around. And yeah, quite honestly I just figured this look deserved as much screen time as possible. So this is set in 1645. And during that time there was a civil war between the Roundheads and the Cavaliers, so the people supporting the king versus the people supporting Parliament. It was a time of great turmoil. It was also a time of great mistrust, and witch hunting was rife. Many people across the country were being accused of witchcraft, and the Witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins was travelling around parts of the country to interrogate these alleged witches and put them under trial, and a lot of people died. So that's just a very brief background to the setup of where this story takes place. Book 1 opens up with a woman who is being held by the Witchfinders, Matthew Hopkins and John Stern. She is being tortured and interrogated by them. They are trying to get her to confess that she is indeed a witch. And also in this particular scene is a man called Robert Monk who is learning the witchfinder ways. He is going to set off on his own witch-finding crusade and earn a lot of money doing so. Then we are introduced to our main character, John Ferris. He is a 22-year-old soldier who is now captain within the ranks against the Royalists, but his career there comes to an end when one day he is out riding a new horse. There is an accident and John injures his arm very badly, so he has to spend a lot of time recovering from that injury and then is no longer able to go back into the army. John is due to be married to a girl called Mary Villas, who is from a local Puritan family. Anyway, John's parents come into some money following the death of a relative, and they offer half of it to John so he can start a new life, really set himself up with a farm and somewhere that he and Mary can live once they're married. So one day John goes out travelling to look into buying some land, and while he is away a couple of terrible things happen. One is that John is attacked out on the road by a group of bandits and he is injured badly and out of action for a few days, which delays his return back home to his parents. The other terrible thing is that while John is away, the witchfinder Robert Monk arrives with his group of assistants in the town where John's parents live, and his parents are tried for witchcraft. So back to John. He is injured badly in this fight, but luckily he is saved by someone who comes along and rescues him, looks over him for a few days and nurses him back to health. This person is a black man called Brutus York. Let's remember we're in 1645 in England, so there weren't a ton of black people around, and a lot of people were, well, racist basically. But John owes Brutus his life and they form a quick friendship. So once John is well enough to ride again, he and Brutus get back on the road and travel together back to where John's parents live. And on arrival, John finds that his family home has been burned and ransacked, and then he finds out that his parents have been hanged as witches. Not only that, but the family fortune has gone missing. And as if that wasn't enough, his betrothed Mary has disappeared, and it's thought that she was kidnapped by Robert Monk. So John decides he's going to track down the witchfinder, get his Mary back, and take his revenge for his parents' death. So the story goes back and forth, following John's story, trying to track down Robert Monk, and we also follow Robert Monk and his minions as they travel around the country, trying people for witchcraft and basically torturing and killing a lot of people and getting paid for it. So we learn a bit more about Robert Monk and his group of assistants. We have the three Mendoza brothers who are gypsies, and we have a woman called Liza Hall. Liza and the Mendoza brothers definitely have their own ways of interrogating these people accused of witchcraft, and a lot of it is sexual. So yeah, that's a thing. And I guess that's a good time to mention the fact that this series is labelled as an adult series. And I'll be honest, I thought this was going to be a lot more pornographic than it actually is. There is some sexual content in here, some of it of the more titillating nature, and some of it being the abuse of people being held prisoner while they are being accused of witchcraft. So yeah, it's pretty sleazy. That's probably the best way to describe it. John and Brutus travel together for some time trying to hunt down Robert Monk. They're always 2 steps behind, and eventually Brutus decides to go his own path and leave John to his revenge by himself. Book 1 ends with John finally catching up to the village where Robert Monk is staying, and he manages to kill one of the Mendoza brothers. But right after doing so, Robert Monk is about to shoot John, so John has to scarper, and once he feels it's safe to return again, Robert Monk and the others have already upped and left and it's too late. So John is back on the trail trying to track them down. Okay, on to Book 2, The Trial, the second chilling volume of torture and terror. This picks up right after Book 1, and Robert Monk has put out a reward for the capture of John Ferris. John is back on the road again, and on his travels one day he meets a chap who they end up sharing some food together, and as they get talking it turns out that this guy knows Brutus York and is actually heading in the same direction as he went. So John asks him to give Brutus a message. He has found out where Robert Monk is heading, so John is also heading that way, and this chap says he will pass on the message to Brutus that that is where John is heading, just in case he wants to come back and help him again with his revenge. So John makes his way to another village where he's been told Robert Monk is currently conducting a trial for people accused of witchcraft, and while he's there he's amongst all of these other people sitting in the place where they're holding this particular witch trial, and During the trial, Robert Monk says that the accused have told him about the leader of their coven, and that this person is actually present in the room, and his name is John Ferris. No! So John is captured by Monk and held prisoner, and Monk's minion Liza Hall has her way with John. Yikes. Next day, Monk and his team are on the road again, and they take John with them as prisoner. And one night, it's John and one of the Mendoza brothers who is tasked with taking care of him, and they are sitting around the campfire that night, and the Mendoza brother is singing this bawdy ditty, as was popular in the time. And this was actually one of my favourite scenes. It was really well done, and they're sitting here in the darkness around this fire, and suddenly this other voice is heard singing the same song, and they're like, where is it coming from? It seemed to be coming from everywhere all at once. And yeah, it turns out it was Brutus come back to help John, and he ends up having a bit of a tussle with the Mendoza brother, but he ends up running away. So Brutus and John are back together again and on the road again, and they end up doing the only natural thing to do next: join a travelling acting troupe. That's right. So they are travelling around with this group of people performing little plays in various villages, and at one of the places they're performing, there ends up being this crazy siege that happens, and the people of the village are attacking this group of soldiers who have come into town. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'll keep it brief. And it was pretty cool because all of the women of the village, the like wives and daughters of the menfolk who are out there, are attacking all of these soldiers, and at one point this woman like cuts off this dude's genitals and is like waving it in the air. It was pretty brilliant. So anyway, that all wraps up, and John and Brutus decide their acting days are over, so they are going to head off together and back on the trail of Robert Monk. Eventually they reach the point where they know where Robert Monk is, and they are very close. So they are camped out a little way away, and Brutus decides to go on ahead and do some scouting out. But he ends up being attacked and captured, and it's all pretty brutal and horrible, and he is killed. It was, yeah, really quite gruesome, and I actually cried that he died because he was a really great character, and yeah, I really liked the friendship between him and John. John unfortunately gets there too late to save Brutus, but he does set the whole village on fire, so he does get his own back a little bit. He also manages to track down one of the Mendoza brothers and kills him. That's for Brutus. And John also finds Mary, and he's like, Mary, I love you, I finally found you, come back to me, I'm saving you. And Mary is like, didn't you realise I'm here with Robert Monk of my own free will? No! So John is devastated, and he vows to kill Mary as well. And that is how book 2 wraps up. On to book 3, The Torture. The tagline for this one says, the terrifying climax, finale, to the Witchfinder's reign of terror. And yeah, this wasn't the climax of the story at all, so I've no idea why it says that on the cover. I knew going into it that there were 8 books in the series total, but the fact that it said this on the cover made me think, oh, well maybe this story with John Ferris and Robert Monk comes to a conclusion, and then the rest of the series is about John and some other adventures. But no, there is no conclusion to that story in this book, so yeah, that kind of threw me off a little bit. Anyway, we are now in 1646, and John is still on the trail of Robert Monk, desperate to have his revenge. He is determined to kill Robert Monk, the final Mendoza brother, Liza Hall, and his once true love, Mary Villiers. On John's travels, he meets a couple, Michael and Gwyneth Conway. Michael has the power to see the future, and he uses this as he travels around to tell people's fortunes and such like. but of course within this era of witch finding, yeah, it's probably not the best thing to do to be touting your strange powers. As they're travelling through a particular village, the local annoying teenagers come upon them, and this one particular girl insists on Michael telling her fortune, but Michael sees that things end badly for her and he tries to tell her otherwise because he doesn't want anything bad to happen to them. So he just says, you know, she's gonna have, you know, a bunch of kids, etc. But it turns out that his vision was true, because after a little scuffle, she actually ends up dying right there and then. And it turns out she is the daughter of the local lord. So Michael, Gwyneth and John are all held prisoner, and they're going to get Robert Monk in to try them as witches. John does manage to escape eventually, and he tells Michael and Gwyneth that he will come back to rescue them too. But wouldn't you know it, once John catches up with Monk and his crew, Robert Monk finds John first and throws him back in the cell with Gwyneth and Michael. John is desperate to escape and be able to rescue the Conways as well, and for all of them to get out of there. And yeah, a few things happen, there's a bit of a scuffle, and yeah, to cut a long story short, unfortunately both Michael and Gwyneth are killed, but John manages to get free, and he has his revenge against Liza Hall and manages to kill her. So that's another one off the list. And that is the end of book 3. So that concludes books 1, 2 and 3 of the Witches series by James Darke. I really enjoyed this, it was really entertaining, and I do want to track down the rest of the books in the series. There are 8 in total. Initially, after reading each of these books, I rated them 3.5 stars each, but I ended up going back and bumping that up to 4 stars because I did really get invested in this story, and I really do want to find out what happens to John and if he does eventually have his revenge against these awful people who killed his parents and have killed a lot of other innocent people along the way. These books are well written, really compelling, fast-paced and entertaining. They're a great mix of horror and adventure. There's an interesting cast of characters, there's the revenge element of the story, there is some violence and action and gruesomeness, there is some sex and sleaze. It's all going on in these books of like less than 150 pages each. Yeah, basically these were a lot of fun and I rated them 4 stars each. Let me know if you've read these, I would love to hear what you thought. Or yeah, if you happen to have books 4 to 8 lying around somewhere that you want to send my way, then that would be cool. Let me know if you've read anything else by James Darke or Lawrence James. It would be really interesting to hear about some of his other works. Thank you ever so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!